How am I involved in the rock scene? How do I contribute to the genre and scene? I mean, I would say I'm involved just by playing songs, playing lots of shows, playing with other bands, going and seeing other bands. I mean, I feel like there's not really that much to it if you're in the space, whether it's to see rock shows or to be a part of rock shows or put on rock shows. And I guess you're involved in the scene, and that all three of those are things that I do pretty regularly. How do I represent myself in rock? How was I able to include myself in it? Include myself. I've been playing rock since I was pretty young, but I guess find the right people or the kind of people who I want to be involved in a scene with, and they're going to be welcoming enough that if you just go to the right shows and talk to the right people, then you're included. I think that there are some people, I think that that's not necessarily the case for every band or every show that you see, and I think some scenes, and it's hard to, a lot of this stuff isn't so defined. I think some scenes are more inclusive than others, but I feel like, the scenes that I want to be a part of are always going to be where people are making good music, and then you tell them that, and then you end up being friends, and you end up making music together, seeing their shows, and they see your shows, and I've made definitely some lifelong connections through just doing that. So I think that's sort of the best way to be included and be represented, is to just show up and talk to people and tell them that you like their stuff if you did. What kind of rock do I make? It's sort of hard to pin down one specific thing, but over the years I've started telling people I make psychedelic rock, garage rock, some flares of punk in there. You can put a whole bunch of different labels on stuff, but a lot of the bands I like are either lean, sort of punk in that, they're playing, I don't need to define punk. They're playing more punk-inspired rock music, or they're playing more sort of psychedelic rock where there's more space. Definitely also in the recent years with both of those, with the garage side and the psychedelic side, gravitated towards bands that improvise and make that a part of their live set, and I've definitely tried to make that a part of my live set. Any advantages or disadvantages of being part of the genre? Advantages, I love, my favorite thing is just getting to play live, and rock is very geared towards that. It's very geared towards being in a space where music, I guess a lot of genres, but I like a rock band. I like getting together with my friends and making music. I don't know, it sounds sort of simple. So that, I say, would be the advantage, is that rock lends itself to a band and to live shows, which are my favorite parts. Disadvantages, since as far as pop music goes, rock has sort of been in the mainstream now for, over 60 years. It's hard to feel like you're doing something new and not derivative. I think that the way I kind of try to resolve that for myself is by just making whatever I'm excited about, try to consume new music, and I don't know, I think that when it becomes less fun is when I am trying to figure out what it is while I'm making it, if that makes sense. And if I just try to make things that I'm excited about without worrying, where does this fit in, or where does it come from, or where is it going, do you have any expectations for this genre? It's so hard to say. It seems like rock is sort of having a nice little wave for itself, but what does that even mean, people are always going to be making rock music so long as the so long as the music is going around and people have instruments to play and can get together. So I expect that will keep happening for the foreseeable future. There's this thing online, this is you talking, there's this thing online where rock isn't as mainstream anymore and rock bands aren't as popular. What's my opinion on that? My opinion, it makes sense because rock was fresh and new in the form we know it as in like the late 50s and 60s, and that was now over 60 years ago. And the things that made it fresh then became tropes, and then now what was exciting then is not as exciting. But I think that by continuing to listen to how the genres evolved, how other genres have evolved, incorporating elements of both as well as elements of, what music has been like at different points in time. There's tons of bands now that are making fresh rock music that isn't, that feels cool and feels new and doesn't feel like a rehash of something that's already happened. I don't know. I hate this. You hear all the time, rock is dead, and it's like, I don't know. Maybe rock isn't topping the charts, but that's because rock gave way to all these other different genres of popular music, and now they're topping the charts, and now, rock had its... But rock is still being made by tons and tons and tons of people, and still being listened to by tons and tons and tons of people, whether that's rock from, back then or rock from now. I think that the rock music is there if you look for it. I remember being a kid and thinking that, like the time has passed, and then it's like you just do a little bit of digging and you realize everybody and their mother's making rock music, and so you just need to, dig around a little bit, and maybe they're not gonna achieve the levels of fame, but I think that's also a part of it, is that, so, and I hate this too, that rock is kind of wrapped up in this, like, rock and roll persona, rock and roll lifestyle, whatever, and it's like, oh, is rock dead because the rock star is dead and we don't have A-list famous people making rock music anymore? But fuck that. People are still making rock music. They might not be the biggest pop star in the world or the biggest star in the world, but tons of people are still making rock music, and they're making good rock music. And if anything, I almost like more that now the people who are making good rock music are just, pretty regular people who are concerned with making good music and not, not the popularity that it once necessarily could have attained you. And you say, will there be a sudden resurgence in rock music soon? Like, who knows? I mean, look, my favorite bands now, or current rock bands, are like King Gizzard and the OCs and Geese, and all three of them, like, in the time I've been following King Gizzard, I've seen their crowds go from, in the 1,000 range to in the 10,000 range. And they're hosting their own festival now. But if you asked most people, they'd probably be like, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, who the hell are you talking about? And, same with Geese. I've seen them rise in, status, I guess, over the last few years to the point where they're playing SNL in a few weeks. And I think that's really cool. I never would have assumed that one of my favorite rock bands who's not like, who's really, again, doing their own thing for the love of the game and making new, fresh rock music would be on SNL. I never would have expected that would happen. But again, like, probably, a lot of people you ask I don't know. It's hard to say. Who knows? Who, and the OCs, it's like they've been just steadily doing their thing now for like more than 20 years, and they're still packing out venues, and it's like, Yeah, so resurgence, what does that mean? That, I don't know, it's exciting to see that Geese is sort of mainstream in a way that maybe these other bands aren't, but in the same way, it's like even just seeing King Gizzard's audience grow, or even like certain, people are going to keep going to shows, and I think that the resurgence as it pertains to like the broad swath of people knowing about who the best rock bands are, like, who knows, but fans of the genre are always going to keep seeing the shows, and hasn't gone away, and it's not going away. Should rock stay underground? Is there any traditions in New York rock artists aren't following? I'll address the first one first. Should rock stay underground? Like, no. I think that there's a lot of, like, I don't know. People should just make the music, and then whoever likes it can like it. That's sort of where I fall on that issue. I mean, I think there's a lot of cool stuff that has come from rock being underground. As two people from the DMV, like Fugazi is like a huge influence of mine, and I think that they're being an underground band and saying no to what was traditionally offered to a successful rock band, and maintaining the means of production and choosing to do things their way. That's really cool, and I like elements of that, and as it, translates to this weird landscape in the 21st century, I think it's, it's cool for rock bands to be doing things on Bandcamp and doing in-person events. We're living in an era where whatever genre of music you make, if you would like to, you have the freedom to make any music you want and not have to answer to anybody and put that out and have that be the final product. And I guess in certain situations, maybe that's a trade-off you make with being, I guess on a major label, or maybe they would tell you how to do certain things. But I think, we're long past the era of rock music needing to be radio friendly. So in that sense, I'm happy that it's not, because bands like King Gizzard, who make, 30 albums and everyone's different, that would never be able to exist if they were aiming to win Grammys or be radio friendly or have a platinum album or whatever. And I think it's really cool that, they took their stuff off Spotify and they had like the 25 best-selling albums on Bandcamp, which shows that there's this force coming from the bottom up that people like what they're doing, and it doesn't have to this commercialized form of music. So I think that all of those things are sort of come from this underground culture of rock. But having said that, I think that a band as big as them at this point, a band who's selling out the Hollywood Bowl or Red Rocks or whatever the hell they're doing, it's like, at that point, they're not underground anymore. They're a giant touring rock band, and I think that's great. And I think that makes me super happy that you can do both. And that's really, or a band like Geese, like even with, the success that they've had, their music is weird as hell, and their music doesn't conform to, commercial radio standards. So I think that there are lessons to be learned from underground rock scenes, but just again, if people like the music, that's what it's really all about. And are there any traditions in new rock artists aren't following? Oh, I see. Are there any traditions new rock artists aren't following? I see. I don't know. It's hard to say that because there's so many different artists, and I don't even know the half of them. And again, this even isn't true amongst all artists, but something that I appreciate about this current era of rock is that, it sort of became associated with the genre that I think so many rock stars from the 60s and 70s were just like giant pieces of shit with huge egos. And not to say that the ego part has gone by the wayside, unfortunately, but it's like it's like all these stories come out about who these people were who made great music that changed so many people's lives. And it's like, fuck, I wish that wasn't a part of who they are. And I think a lot of that behavior, unfortunately, became associated with the genre. And I am happy that I think, I don't know him personally, but I'd like to think that the genre, through leaving, the top level of commercial success for however much time, has sort of, like, the bands that I like seem much more down to earth. And again, they're totally, I'm sure so many bands full of pieces of crap who are still making rock music, unfortunately. But I think that a lot of the bands I like, it's sort of ushered in this era of like, hey, like, rock artists aren't making crazy amounts of money, and this sort of DIY era that we're living in has sort of made it so that I think that at least, I would say, I see more artists that seem down to earth, and the artists I like today seem to not be embracing the whole, quote unquote, like, rock and roll ethos or whatever. And I guess that was also part of the grunge movement, but, all this, like, mysterious bullshit, all the, God among men. I think a lot of the bands I like now are just like, just a bunch of people, and we like to play. And I like that, because that's the kind of stuff I like to see. Well, yeah, in the 60s, it was very influenced by blues and jazz because, there wasn't rock and roll before it. And, you look at even just players in a lot of bands, a lot of these players have just been raised on jazz. And I think that the further you go away from that, it becomes fewer players are raised on jazz and blues, and more people are raised on rock. And that, leads to more, that leads to the evolution of the genre. You're getting influenced by the first generation. So I think that, by the 80s, you had people who had listened to bands in the 60s making music. And, MTV too, when you're talking about formats, MTV certainly its stamp, and then the rejection of that whole era in the 90s. I think every next decade is really, it's some amount of influence. I mean, this isn't, reinventing the wheel, anything I'm about to say, but, every next decade is just going to reject certain things from the past and embrace certain things from the past. So I think that now, we have certain artists who really embrace the social media era and the TikTok Reels era, and some artists who really reject that and feel like now is the time more than ever to create a product that is only accessible live. And I think, like, now you can see the two sides of, there are rock artists who are doing very well with the short form format and in, like, sort of the songwriting sphere that sort of can work. And I think that other artists say, hey, well, we can post as much long format as we want. So you see bands who post every single show, or post whole shows to YouTube, or post live session, whatever it is that, it allows people to put out unlimited content. So yeah, I would say that we're in a place now where I think, especially after COVID, I mean, I can't speak for everybody. I am, and I was before COVID, but I'm as enthused as ever about the live show. I think that that's where it's at. I spend enough time in my house or out and about listening to shit in headphones or out of speakers, and what I crave, both as somebody who makes music and as somebody who consumes music, is playing live, seeing live shows, seeing people, being with people in a room where you're just there. And I think that that's enough. I hate, and it's so sort of a part of it, but sometimes it's like you're at a concert and it's like everybody's like recording, and it's like, what I love about the show is, like, you just get to be there. And sure, so not to say, you take a video every once in a while, that's nice to have, but yeah, it's nice to just be in a room and not also be somewhere else, like we kind of are the whole rest of our lives. And I think to kind of wrap up all these, what I love personally about rock music is I think it's a genre uniquely equipped to get everybody in the same room and not be it's really one of the few times when I feel like I'm fully present is when I'm at a show or when I'm playing a show. Thanks for thinking of me for this.